Hello, I'm City of Las Vegas Mayor Carolyn Goodman. Thank you for joining us for another segment of Hello Mayor. Today we're focusing on a critical topic that continues to plague us and which generates strong debate not only here in Nevada, but across the nation and most significantly in Congress. And that is the use of Yucca Mountain for a repository of high-level radioactive nuclear waste. This site is just 90-plus miles northwest of Las Vegas. During the 8-year term of President Obama and his administration, and with a strong push by U.S. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, this effort was stopped. But now, with a new Republican administration and that of President Trump, this entire push has been revitalized. Joining me to learn more about this, we're honored to have former two-term United States Senator Richard Bryan and our wonderful ongoing multi-term District 1 Congresswoman Dina Titus.
Okay.
With us, we also have City of Las Vegas Government Affairs Manager Brian McAnallen. So welcome and thank you both, all three of you, for joining us here today. And what I'd love to start with, we're going to show a map of Nevada, a little bit about the days of the test site and where it's located in Yucca.
Yeah. Well, I used to work at the test site after I got out of the Army in 1960. I worked up at Mercury for a period of time, but the history dates back to the aftermath of World War II. We were testing in the Pacific, the Bikini test and other tests, and ultimately the decision was made primarily to save expense to do the testing here in the United States. And that was when the Nevada test site. And the first of those occurred when I was in the 8th grade in the winter of 1951. And that went on for many, many years as an atmospheric testing. And then later, after the test ban, it was an underground testing program. But there's a long history there, and a lot of people have suffered as a consequence because of their health-related issues.
Well, you know, I know that this property is probably federal property. How much of Nevada is owned by the federal government?
Well, we are the state with the most property owned by the federal government, except for Alaska, and it's about 86 to 87%. And the size of the test site is equal to about the size of Rhode Island here within Nevada.
So we had no choice about this, and going forward, a little more discussion, but we have a little tape here from former Mayor Pro Tem Gary Reese, who knows firsthand the dangerous and deadly effects that were caused by living downwind of the Nevada test site. And we had the chance to sit down with him to get his perspective on thought of disposing nuclear waste in Nevada.
Former City Councilman Gary Reese cuts hair here at his barbershop that he's owned for 53 years. Before moving to Las Vegas, Reese lived in the small town of Panaca, Nevada. His family moved to Panaca when he was only 2 months old.
It was a wonderful place to grow up. I got to play basketball and football when I was in high school. I got to play basketball when I was in the elementary school. I loved growing up in a small community.
A small community with not a whole lot to do. So one of the things Reese remembers his family doing to pass the time was watch the above-ground nuclear blast at the Nevada test site, just 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas.
You'd feel the boom, and you'd feel the shake, then you just see this cloud come up like this, then the red would come out on the top of it, you know.
More than 1,000 above and below ground nuclear experiments were conducted at the site from 1951 until 1992.
We knew what it was, the above ground shot, you know, and stuff, but we didn't worry about it, you know.
They didn't worry because they were told the experiments were safe and were never warned that being close to nuclear testing could be dangerous.
But I can always remember when I going back into town, there was a little bit of a dusting about like this. You can see where people, you know, went across the road or whatever. And like one time we was the first ones down there, and you could see our tracks making, it's just like in a little bit of snow, you know.
Reese graduated from Lincoln County High School in 1959 as part of a class of 26 students. 14 of Reese's classmates have passed away, and out of those 14, 11 have died from some form of cancer.
A lot of us have survived. You know, none of us are guaranteed a life from here to here. But again, though, if we hadn't washed those shots, how many of my friends would be alive today?
In 2000, former President Bill Clinton signed an expanded radiation compensation bill to include those like Reese that lived in Lincoln County, downwind of the test site. But the payments from the government do little to comfort Reese, who had his thyroid removed after learning he had thyroid cancer, and to most of his family members that have also suffered from some type of cancer.
My mother had a breast removed. My brother's wife, she passed away from a brain tumor. She was about 59 years old. And there's a lot of people I know up there that have had cancer.
Reese, of course, has his concerns with the Trump administration signaling they will move forward with the idea of shipping and burying the nation's high-level nuclear waste here in Nevada.
And I understand them casks, or, that they're supposed to be safe, that they're supposed to last this many years and all that stuff. My contention is they told us it was safe to watch the shots up in Panaca too. And if it's safe there and it wasn't, how can we believe them when they say this is safe? And I don't believe them. I would fight it to my dying breath to have it put out there. This is a game, us not wanting it and them wanting it. So we're playing a game of badminton, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And there's always a winner and there's always a loser. And I don't want to see any of my friends be losers again.
Watching what Gary Reese and his family have gone through, we can see why so many here in Nevada are skeptical about the safety of nuclear waste coming into Nevada. So, to get back to this, Yucca, how is Yucca?
Let me add a footnote, if I may. In 1951, most Americans were pretty naive about the implications of radioactivity. It wasn't widely understood. And so initially, Nevadans kind of embraced the Nevada test site as a new industry. And we were assured that it was absolutely safe to detonate atomic bombs in the air, 65 miles from Las Vegas. We now know, and Gary Reese and those who worked at the test site that suffered the after effects can testify that. So today, in the context of Yucca Mountain, everything's safe, not to worry, Nevadans rightly have a healthy dose of skepticism there.
Well, and knowing your background too and how extensively you've researched this, spoken about it, knowing, first of all, you said the test site actually, the BM and federal land is 65 miles?
About 65 miles to
So
the
it's
base, to
closer.
Mercury, the base camp, yes.
In fact, that's one of the reasons they picked Nevada for the test site, is it had the most federal land that they already had jurisdiction over, so they didn't have to fight with local governments about locating the test site there. And Senator Bryan is so right. Remember, you're too young, Brian, but in the 50s, the way we were reassured that we'd be safe were the duck and cover practices, even in schools, where you would duck under your desk and cover your head, and that would protect you. And the Doomtown test out at the test site, where Penny's donated lots of mannequins and appliances and stuff, and they'd blow up a bomb to see what would be the impact on a community. And government reassured us that we would be safe. Well, we weren't safe, and now when they reassure us that Yucca Mountain will be safe, we have healthy skepticism.
Well, and I think that is one of the biggest things, because I know the Department of Energy has sent representatives out here to talk about moving all this radioactive and nuclear waste to Nevada, to the test site, and talking to us, assuring us that they can't tell us the routes, and Brian will speak to that later, when the shipments are going to occur, what routes they're going to take, and how often. So the most important thing, though, now is our concerns, first of all, here in Nevada, and about, I know you've been speaking at length in this. What are the committees that you're sitting on right now?
Well, I'm on infrastructure, and of course that includes a lot of the transportation routes. So if you build a new highway, for example, or you build a new railroad line, that will come through that committee, and that's going to take that kind of infrastructure. And then I'm on foreign relations, and that's less directly related, but you often hear about what other countries are doing with their waste. There was a big story recently about Finland and reprocessing and how they're storing and all. So it does have some international implications. Senator Bryan has been doing this for a long time. In fact, my first real getting to know him was when I was in the state legislature trying to get a resolution through, and he was governor.
Well, and I know because of the fact of the infrastructure, we have been assured that the rating by civil engineers is that the infrastructure around the country is rated at a D-.
Let me say that the ball game has shifted. Originally, ostensibly, it dates back to the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982. And that was signed into law by President Reagan in the following January. And the idea is we search all over the country for different formations, and that 3 locations, after thoroughly characterized, as the language of the statute required, the president would pick one. Then 1987, the infamous Screw Nevada bill, which, look, we're not going to look all over the country. So it was politicized from the very outset, not by Nevadans, but by others. We'll look only at Nevada. And since then, the concept has changed completely. Originally, the formation at Yucca Mountain is called welded tough, and it was believed by the scientific that it would itself, without any engineering barriers, contain the radioactivity. That has long since been abandoned, and they've come up with this Rube Goldberg, Kakumeni approach that will, hundreds of years later, put titanium drip shields and all that sort of thing. So the concept, or the original rationale for Nevada, changed completely.
Well, and two, you know, knowing the issues of the faults, the earthquake faults that we have.
Well, Senator is so right. They were going to look at 3 sites, then they narrowed it to the 1 site. They were going to build another facility in the east. Now they're not going to do that. And the science really changed. The original science was find a place that will be safe. The science now is make Yucca work.
Yeah.
And those are 2 very different approaches.
Very good.
And the issue, it seemed to me, though, is nobody seems to care across the country about Nevada. And so they would care, though, about their own communities, their own cities, their own states. And this material is going to transport through any one of which, where there could be a tunnel fault, a rail fault,
Exactly.
a road issue.
I'll defer to the Congresswoman because she's been in the active fight now, and I've been 16 years since I left the Senate. But I think it goes to 41 different states, and
right.
It is absolutely very, very dangerous. And the thing that kind of irritates you is the pressure. This is driven by the nuclear power industry.
Right.
And the Department of Energy has been a revolving door where people leave the industry, go into government, then come back. And so the big advocates are the nuclear energy people, and many of whom are in the Department of Energy and continue to be.
So throughout history, and more recently, why haven't we been working on deactivating, repurposing, or getting the research done rather than continuing to look at moving this material and storing it?
Well, it kind of goes back to, excuse me, Jimmy Carter's days. We were going to look at breeder reactors and reprocessing the waste, so you'd still have some left, but it would be much less. And that's what they do in parts of Europe. Again, Senator Bryan is right. It's the industry. They didn't want to make the investment. That would have been very expensive to change the process. They used the excuse that, well, it would provide material for terrorists, but that was not really what it was about. It was follow the money.
Well, knowing that we have been back and during U.S. Conference of Mayors, which meets twice a year, once outside of Washington and once in Washington, D.C., Brian has already arranged continuously since he's been on board for me to get in with the different secretaries of the cabinet to go ahead and talk about these issues. And when we went back to the Department of Energy,
in 2016, you sat across from the secretary and had a lengthy discussion with him about this. And, you know, of course, during the Obama administration, the policy in DOE was for consent-based siting. And of course, Congresswoman, you and the rest of our delegation are doing a great job leading that effort with bills in Congress introduced the beginning of this year to work toward consent-based siting. Now that we have a new administration, Secretary Perry has been out to see the test site. I'm not sure if he even notified us when he went out there to do that. And I think DOE has been sort of cagey at best on where things are going. The administration has put money in, I think $120 billion for going forward with it's 120 million going forward with restarting the licensing process, but clearly we have the fight in front of us. I know Senator Bryan, who chairs the governor's agency for nuclear projects, your team has done a fantastic job preparing us and getting us ready for not only the legal fight, but also the political fight.
We're revved up. We're ready to go to join with the Congresswoman and the few Nevada allies that we have to make sure this doesn't happen.
And that's why what you're doing is so important, Mayor, because if it is ever consent-based, you will play a role in whether it's consent or not. Even though it's located in Nye County, the impact on Las Vegas and Clark County will be tremendous. So having you get other mayors who are along those transportation routes is critical. You mentioned 41 states. I stood outside the hearing room with a map of all those routes, and it goes through over 320 congressional districts. And I was trying to say to my colleagues, look, it's coming right by your churches, your schools, your neighborhoods, your businesses. You might want to rethink this, but
well,
it's a tough
knowing
battle.
too that this administration is saying it's going to put its money into revitalization of infrastructure, shouldn't that be the thing? Fix the infrastructure first, then go ahead and do your shipping later on, which you know is going to take forever to get done. But how can these communities where we as mayors are the grassroots and the people, what can we be doing? And this is 12 U.S. Conference of Mayors, 1,200 mayors of cities of 30,000 and more. There's a huge effort that we can be making, which I think we've been sort of quiet, even though the resolutions that we've passed.
You and your husband have been very successful in getting these resolutions passed year after year, and I think we are elevating the discussion, certainly with the conference. You had a fantastic meeting with Mayor Garcetti where you pointed out the rail routes that would be impacting Los Angeles. If we look at those maps that you were talking about, Congresswoman, we see significant railway through Kansas City, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and if you think about it, each one of those communities has really aging bridges and crumbling infrastructure that we need to be worried about. And I think highlighting those with the mayors was extremely important, and I think we're having that discussion similar to the one you're having in Congress with each individual congressman.
Great.
In Florida, if you look at that map, and coincidentally we were there in Miami for that conference, there is a roadway that runs through the entire state of Florida from one nuclear power plant to the next, where they would truck the waste out to Yucca. It's pretty frightening when you see how close they come. I don't know if you know that one of the railways would be right past the United States Capitol on the House side, not on the Senate side, but pretty close to the center of government.
And think about Nevada, we don't have that many roads and railroads, so it's not a lot of options of where it's going to go. It's going to go through population centers.
Well, and two, and Senator in particular, and knowing you've been governor of this state, when you look at the amount of land the federal government owns here, realistically, what chance in this administration do we have to stop it, and what can the ground swell? What can we be doing?
Well, you're doing your part in enlisting the support and making these mayors aware that this is not just a Nevada issue, that they're going to be impacted in their communities, as Brian has just described, with these transportation corridors. I think I want to add to the point that the Congresswoman made. There is a way that the Obama administration supported, and I know the Congresswoman and her colleagues in Nevada did, for consent-based operation. The Congresswoman referenced Finland. They didn't force it down a community. They met with the people in the community. They assured them. There they've got a granite formation, which I think is far preferable in terms of geologic type of material, but they did it on a consent base, and that's what we were talking about trying to do, a consent base where a community can make a decision on its own to make that decision to embrace it.
Well, as I understood it, in Texas,
That's
they
right.
were they
Yes.
were inviting it.
That's
And the
right.
other piece, which I would really like clarification, from my understanding, and when we were with the Secretary of Energy 2 years ago or a year ago, my understanding was that there is more than $1 billion in reserves set aside to pay the recipient storage state or community for that storage, but the storage that's been ongoing in New Mexico hasn't received a dime yet.
Well, that's right. The WHIP project down there, they're very angry about it because they were promised the moon and didn't get anything. And back to the consent, you know, this was a recommendation from a blue ribbon panel that was made up of experts, not somebody who was on Dancing with the Stars, but real scientists. And this is what they came up with. And do you know that in the bill that passed out of the House Commerce Committee, they create interim storage, but for the interim storage, they allow consent. But for the permanent storage, they do not.
What is at risk geologically? What are some of the issues that we have besides the faults? What about the water? What about,
Well, I mean, just a couple, and the Congressman has been much more technically involved than I have in recent years. But the idea that these radionuclides could spread, contaminate the water table. I don't think any place in the world they're talking about building a nuclear repository on top of the water table. On top of the water table. And we're talking about things that are lethal for tens of thousands of years. So if there is now, and there was even back when I was governor in the 80s, some people that think, gosh, there's a pot of gold at the end of the nuclear rainbow. I know, Congresswoman, you hear that.
Yeah.
The basic rationale for opposing it is the health and safety of Nevadans. And those of us who believe that there are concerns, we would not compromise the health and safety of future generations of Nevadans. And based upon the federal government's track record of promising and not fulfilling, those are pretty powerful arguments, I think, Congresswoman.
No question.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've got going for us is it's going to be so expensive to finish it. It's kind of been mothballed and have to start all over. It's going to be billions and billions of dollars to finish it. Now, the Republicans in the House are not going to want to come up with the money for that. So where they're going to get the funds to do it, I don't know. And if you think they're going to add money on top of what it costs to build it to give us a little lagniappe, you can forget it. We're not going to get anything. And even if one Congress did, the next Congress could take it away.
Exactly.
And to the moral, ethical question, how much is enough? How much would you say a child's life is worth?
Yes.
Or how much would you say destroying the economy of Las Vegas is worth? You know, that's not a negotiation we want to have.
well, and the lies. The lies of the testing of the bombs and what Gary Reese had been through, and losing so many in his family, losing so many in his high school class. To me, how can you believe what the government is telling us?
Well, even if you were inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt, which I'm not, and I'm sure the Congressman feels the same way, we're talking about something for tens of thousands of years.
That's right.
Nobody can give you reassurance as to what's going to happen tens of thousands of years, other than the lethality, that is the fact that it's still deadly. So, there's just so much uncertainty here, but it's driven again by the nuclear power industry that believes that somehow if they can get this Nevada dump open, that somehow there'll be a new day for the nuclear power industry.
Okay. We are in a situation now where we really understand and have a sense of why not. What is, talking about repurposing and deactivating and putting in research, what is, at least for the next decade or two, what's an answer when they are over encumbered with this material at these different sites? What can
Well,
we be doing?
and I would like to have the Congresswoman respond in addition, but clearly right now we have dry cask storage that's been licensed. It's on site, so you're not transporting it from. That's certainly for the foreseeable future provides a short-term alternative. By short-term, I'm talking about decades, maybe even hundreds of years. And Congresswoman, I don't know, you've probably done much more than this than I have recently.
No, I agree with that, and they make it kind of an alarmist argument,
Yes.
but it's not. There's room there to put more waste. They just don't want it in their backyard.
Yep.
They don't mind if it's in our backyard, but they don't want it in their backyard. And some of the people who are the very strongest states' rights arguers,
Yes.
they are so for states' rights, but for their states' rights, not for our states' rights. So there's no intellectual honesty in the argument. Something you said, Senator Bryan, reminded me. One of the interesting things about that tens of thousands of years, they're trying to figure out what kind of warning signs that they can put out there that people or whoever whoever's here 10,000 years can look at and go, oh, maybe we shouldn't dig here. How do you communicate that so far into the future?
So what are you telling those of us who are living in this country at this time is the best way, knowing that we've had a huge number of ads going on here, specifically targeting Senator Heller, who happens to be a Republican, on the health issues and the health bills that are there. Pummeled, and I don't know where the funding's coming from, which PAC or how it's being done. But is that a vehicle or is that not a vehicle to be using not the social media so much as the TV and really?
Well, let me defer to the Congresswoman on that. I'm not sure that.
Well, one of the problems is that the nuclear industry has so much money that they can put out ads saying, get rid of it, get it out of your backyard. And the people on our side are just more the activists, and there's not a lot of funding available to do television ads or hire expensive lobbyists. That's why the commission that the senator heads up out of the state of Nevada is so important, because you do some of that kind of outreach.
We do, and we have the scientific. In fact, this very day, the Board of Examiners in Carson City will be approving a new contract to enable us to continue the fight. We've been working on this for decades with highly technical people. Let me mention the one argument that irritates me among others. They've got a big push that doesn't it make sense to have all the nuclear waste consolidated in one site? You hear that over and over again. In point of fact, wherever there is an active reactor, for a period of time, there will always be spent nuclear fuel rods on the site.
Right.
On the site. So those sites that have nuclear reactors will be required, because of the high toxicity, to continue to have nuclear waste, if you will, on site as long as that reactor is still active.
Maybe we should look at spending more to protect those individual sites. You know, security there is not very great. You've been working very hard to get more Homeland Security money for Las Vegas. Maybe some money that's part of those formulas should go to protect those sites where they do exist.
So what type of communique can we undertake from Nevada that would reach out? Maybe it's only because of the success in the Obama administration that we would reach out only to Democratic mayors. I'd love to see us just send out something with enlisting the help of the senators and congressperson from the states that might be favorable for grassroots support.
Well, I have to say that by and large, my experience, and I'll defer again to the Congresswoman for something more contemporary, we didn't have a lot of support from other states. So I think ultimately the burden is ours. Now, with all this talk about money being put in to reactivate Yucca Mountain, the state has raised more than 200 objections. So, I mean, this fight is a long way from over. Even if, in a worst-case scenario, some money is appropriated to restart the project, I mean, this process is going to go on for years and years. We think we can win it on the merits in terms of the science and the legal requirements to site Yucca Mountain.
But doing it ourselves from here rather than entertaining anything to let the communities around the rest of the country through which this nuclear waste is going to be passed. To me, I think that's why we've had the favorable results from the mayors, because we don't want it coming through here. We know our bridges and our tunnels. And I just read yesterday or 2 days ago, the Medford, Washington tunnel has some weaknesses again.
Well, you're seeing the Hanford project where they've had some leaks, and they're worried about that. But I think maybe the infrastructure argument is one that we understand because we're in government, but the public doesn't get that so much. I think what gets young people engaged today are environmental issues. So if we can tie this more to just kind of general climate or environment or that sort of thing, that may be how we get a new generation on our side.
Some thoughts on that beyond the water and the earthquake faults. Are there other areas, are there things that we're missing in communication to the younger generation?
Well, people don't understand really how dangerous radiation is.
Yep.
You can't see it, taste it, smell it. You know, you go get an X-ray, that doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And they're very effective at putting that argument out.
Yes.
Oh, you're not getting any more radiation than if you stood out in the sun for an
Yeah,
hour,
yeah.
or if you were working in a building
Yes,
that's
yes,
downtown.
yes.
And they have been very good at making that argument. They also have good PR because they take buses out to the Yucca Mountain site, and you stand up on that mesa and you look out there across Nevada. It's like a moonscape. You don't see any people,
Right.
you don't see anything. You think, well, gosh, maybe this is a good place to put it. Well, we don't believe that Nevada is a wasteland. We think there are things out there to save. But, you know, that's an effective tool that they're using.
So do you see, I know we've been to public hearings in the community, you were very instrumental in getting, what do you see in the future for public hearings, public involvement?
Let me just interrupt for a moment and say the one thing, since Dina was so effective, pardon me, Congresswoman Titus was so effective at the state legislative level, the level of opposition to Yucca Mountain has not diminished over the intervening years. In this past legislative session, as Brian will tell you, overwhelming support for a resolution opposing Yucca Mountain. So in the intervening years, Nevadans are still steadfast, notwithstanding this siren call that, gosh, if we accepted it, I mean, it would usher in an era of economic prosperity and all kinds of money would come to us, which I think the Congresswoman has debunked based upon experiences elsewhere where they've fallen into that line.
Yeah, that's right.
And did you find up at the legislature, I mean, what the senator has said? Did you hear any more effective way that we can be moving forward, or?
Well, I think the senator and congresswoman are absolutely right that Nevada's resolve to fight Yucca Mountain has never been stronger, and I think the governor's state of the state, he said that he will be relentless in opposition to citing Yucca Mountain.
And this
as
is
a
cross-party
licensing-
lines.
Which
Yes,
is,
it-
I mean, that's what's so
Well, I was with the
incredible.
Attorney General last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, at a strategy meeting where we had all of our experts, the people who have been retained as scientific experts, and the Attorney General spoke and reaffirmed his strong opposition. So the Congressman is right, it's strong bipartisan opposition here.
Which is good.
And in Nye County, to cut them a little slack, they have all kinds of financial problems there. Huge financial problems, and the Department of Energy has been pretty effective in dangling this out and that out, and so with them, they see this as a way to maybe get out of a financial situation, which has forced them to close down a lot of
Hospital.
public facilities, particularly in Tonopah.
So if you looked at a timeline at the worst scenario to have this become effective, what do you see as the worst scenario?
Well, I don't want to put a time certain on it. I think the two advantages that we've discussed, one is that there are lots of things we can file lawsuits against, most of them environmental and states' rights issues, and that's going to be hard for them to get the money to actually complete the project. So that pushes it way down the road. But wouldn't it be a better use of taxpayer dollars and energy and other kinds of resources if we were working towards a different solution from this point on instead of throwing good money after bad?
Yep.
So are you hearing from our friends and across the aisle anything else in Washington? I know that certainly within Nevada we see it. How about other states? How about in New Mexico where there is storage? And I'm amazed that Texas has said, bring it on in. They don't have the public lands that we have, correct?
Well, I think in fairness, this is a national issue, I would agree, but nobody is more affected than Nevada.
That's right.
It is very hard, you talk about the mayors, and you've done an extraordinary job. Unfortunately, the mayor's support has not translated into congressional support by and large. And that's certainly not your fault, no. In other words, those mayors, many of those states have representatives that are absolutely hook, line, and sinker committed to forcing Yucca Mountain through. Am I correct on
No,
that?
I think you're exactly right. Well, the bill came out of the House Commerce Committee 49-4. Now, we don't know if it'll get to the floor or when it will get to the floor, and they say they're going to change some things, some which are better for us, most of which are worse. But that gives you some idea of the kind of opposition that we have faced.
But isn't that, you alluded to it before, Congresswoman, isn't that because this is not a public issue? Nobody really knows or understands how weak the infrastructure is, these accidents. I mean, I was doing some research and looking at how many bridges have failed over the past 20 years across the country. There's pretty much in some type of infrastructure failure in almost every state, at least through where the roadways are potential.
That's correct. And these maps that we're talking about, these routes that we're discussing, those have been certified by the Department of Energy as the routes that the waste would be transported on. So it's not as if we're making those decisions or deciding these. These are the actual routes that the department has certified. I think the number of bridges and what we've seen over the years, certainly in the last few years, some of those bridges that have collapsed are pretty alarming. You know, the other issue that we kind of haven't touched on is as we have more and more people driving and using other alternative means of transportation, we're seeing a lot of congestion. That is going to slow down some of these trucks. You could also have more accidents because of the congestion. We've seen that certainly increase nationally, and when that happens, you run more of the risk of having some sort of accident with the trucks and even on the rail. You know, I know a few years ago we had a chlorine car come loose and careening down the Union Pacific Railway, which coincidentally is right between Clark County's government center and just down from City Hall, and that would be a major route for transporting waste to Yucca Mountains.
Have you been doing anything with Homeland Security because of the targets of once these, even though they say we're never going to know the routes or when or how often, that's somebody has to know.
That's right.
And certainly there is communique, obviously, through the internet that somehow, what about the Homeland Security portion of this?
Well, I think it adds to the things that make Las Vegas or Southern Nevada a target, you know, whether it's the dam or the test site or Yucca Mountain now. I mean, I think it just compounds the problem, and I don't know that they're ready to deal with it or not.
And with a new secretary in Homeland Security, too. I remember when we were back in Washington 2 years ago and met with Secretary Jay Johnson, you bring up the dam. And what is the effect if that were to...
25% of the nation's gross domestic product is based off of the Colorado River. So if we were to see the dam in some sort of terrorist situation where the dam is a target, you'd certainly lose all the dams downstream from that, Parker Dam and others. You'd have massive flooding into the Imperial Valley and into Mexico. You'd be destroying Mexico's economy as well as all the agriculture that we see out of Southern California and around the Yuma area, not to mention the devastating impact it would have on our community from the loss of water.
Just a historical incident during World War II. There were gun emplacements around the dam. You had to walk, not walk, but you drove with, there was an armed guard on either side. The windows had to be rolled up as they took you across, because the concern, obviously not of a nuclear dimension, but the concern that somehow there'd be an attempt to sabotage the dam and do all of the things that you've discussed that would affect the war industries in Southern California.
You know, another cabinet department that's involved in this is very complex, and there are all kinds of strings tying together, is Interior. And we are very worried that Zinke may come out here and want to reduce the size of Basin and Range, that monument, so that frees up some space to put a rail line to bring it in from northern Nevada, not northern Nevada, but from the north. And so, you know, we're playing this game on a lot of different fronts.
Well, you look at transportation, Homeland Security, the environment, energy, Interior. What have we missed?
I don't think there's
Not much,
left.
not much. I mean, yeah.
So your thoughts going forward with this? I know you're going to continue to fight, and I'm sure there'll be more public hearings. And Senator, is your involvement from the committee What do you see in the immediate future for us?
Well, I mean, frankly, I think the word cagey was used earlier in the broadcast. That is probably a euphemism. I mean, we've kind of been somewhat blindsided, not much notice when these hearings were occurring, and not much communication in terms of what's happening. Some difficulty, but the congressman has worked through that, whether we'd have an opportunity to put our witnesses on to testify.
Exactly.
All of it. So that, in the short term, we need to work, and obviously at the state level, to continue to press the scientific arguments and our opposition to it. And I'm sure as long as the Congresswoman's voice can be heard, her colleagues will know that Nevadans are very much opposed to this.
I think you said, Mayor, you were going to chain yourself to the something. Like, well, we'll be out there with you, so you won't be by yourself.
Do you know something, and I was mentioning it to our director of our show on our public information, it really is to get national attention, because I really do feel, and especially with that vote that you just said of 49-4, it's simply appalling to me. They don't understand how the risk to each community, each city, it's just simply incredible. And the fact that it's under this veil, I can never get out from under Mayor Pro Tem Gary Reese and what was happening in the 50s, and just take a shower. You've got dust on you, just take a shower, when they had to have known.
I mean, you could still look at those old Atomic Energy Commission films.
Yeah.
This is the predecessor to the Department of Energy. When that nuclear cloud comes over, just bring the kids inside, wait till it passes, and then kind of just wash off the car. I mean, it was so disingenuous, and that's why there is a high level of disbelief.
And angst.
And angst
without
about
that.
how can anybody tell us this?
And add to that the fact that we've done our share.
Yeah.
We did all that testing
Yes,
here.
yes.
We made a contribution
Yeah,
to the
yes,
nuclear
yes.
age and to winning the Cold War, and a lot of people sacrificed for it, and they're very proud of it. And they're Cold Warriors. They're heroes. So we've done our share. And also, we don't make any of this waste.
Yeah.
It's made somewhere else, and then they're dumping it on us. So
Yeah.
all of that adds insult to injury.
You know, I'm just a firm believer. Here we are, where there are few of us. What are we, 3 million something in the entire state? We're, you know, and very little of it belongs to us, the people. It belongs to the federal government. And so people don't really look around whether they're in New York or whether they're down in Florida, wherever they are. You know, it's a federal state. Let them have it. We don't care. But I think that, to me, the thrust of this is you have to care, because it's coming through you. And how do we garner? I mean, you're working on the inside. You've been working on the inside of the very federal government that went ahead in the 50s and was responsible for these horrible inaccuracies or actual blatant lies.
But then as now, the public did not understand.
That's right.
In fact, quite
Okay,
to
we
the
got a job
contrary,
to do.
we were pretty excited about it.
Oh, yeah.
We embraced it. There's a remnant of that right downtown, Atomic Liquors. But there were lots of
right.
businesses who incorporated Atomic in their name. Our high school class yearbook one year had the nuclear cloud on the front, and you know, the dawning of a new era. I mean, it was naive in retrospect, but we really didn't know.
We were proud. You know, and I'd just give a little plug to the Atomic Testing Museum, because they have a collection of a lot of this popular culture memorabilia, and they do a good job. I mean, it's Smithsonian sanctioned, so it has to be pretty accurate and reflecting both sides of the story. People should visit it. It's it's at DRI, right at Flamingo.
They
in
don't get the
Paradise.
same walk-in that the Mob Museum
Well,
gets.
that's right, exactly.
And so I'm really pushing hard. They want to relocate. I'd love to
that'd
get
be
them
great, Mayor.
down right there, because that is
Like
part
for-
of the
yeah,
history.
that would be
And
great.
may have to lean on our federal friends and
Get us
to
some grant money
get
or
us some
something.
money or tax credits to do it. But it's getting the word out, and we have to be much more significant in this than to reach the public. So they were outraged and said, don't send it through my community. Because I really do think they don't care about Nevada.
Well, it's a matter of priorities, you know. Just like in the 50s, the priority was build a bomb, win the war, and then win the Cold War.
Right.
And health came second or third on down that list. Right now, the priority by the nuclear industry, as the senator pointed out, is get rid of it, get the monkey off my back, make somebody else assume responsibility for it, and public health is further down the list.
And you have written on this.
I have a book on the test site. Thank you for mentioning, Mayor. It's called Not in My Backyard. And that's what Harry Truman said, that when they decided to start testing in Nevada, they said, well, let's be quiet about it. Let's not scare people about blowing up bombs in their backyard. So it's bombs in the backyard.
So make sure you get that. Is that has Amazon got it on?
It is.
On Amazon. And again,
Bombs in the backyard.
bombs in the backyard. So you have extensively traveled. Did you see any country where the miracle that we should be following?
Well, I think the
exists?
Finland example certainly is an example of an effective consent-based approach. They handle it totally different. I don't know that any place in the world has handled it quite like we have. I mean, creating initially a great deal of credibility gap, and then forcing it on, and then almost trying to bribe us. When I was governor, I would be told, you know, if we really want our allocation of the Colorado River, maybe we would have to accept this. Yes, if we really wanted to get this benefit or that, maybe we would have to accept it. Very thinly veiled. So I've often felt that was coercion and bribery, and my experiences with previous secretaries of energy prior to Senator Moniz, Secretary Moniz, was never a pleasant discussion. Let's put it that way.
Well, I have to tell you, we're out of time.
Oh, well,
I
this is
can't. It's
very
so
interesting.
enlightening to hear the truth and hear the history and the truth, because we have a big job ahead of us. And I want to thank you, Congresswoman. I want to thank you,
very welcome.
Senator, and our wonderful Brian McAnally. This has just been such an interesting time. We have so much to do, and we have to make sure that we stop this waste from storage at Yucca Mountain. And thank you everyone at home who's been watching. You can see it more than once too if you turn on to Hello Mayor. Thanks so much for being with us.